Good evening, everyone. Welcome to episode 47 of the Ear Hustling Podcast with James and Eric.
46, buddy. 46.
Welcome to episode 46 of the Ear Hustling Podcast. Well, with James and Eric. I am Eric. That gentleman right there is James. And we definitely hope that everybody out there is safe and warm in light of what's going on through most of the country with this really, really aggressive weather that we're having. We thank you for inviting us into your video screens to have a nice conversation with us today. As we know, over in Detroit, Michigan, like we were discussing earlier, James, we're like at 4 degrees with about 26 inches of snow over the last 4 days. How's things going over there in Atlanta?
Oh man, we're having it just as bad, man. We're 50 degrees today.
Only 50?
Yeah, only 50. So I didn't go out today, but yesterday went out. I actually had to put on a hoodie. Oh my God, tough.
A hoodie?
I did. I put on a hoodie. Last week I had on shorts. So this week I had to put on a hoodie with the hood on.
Really? And then 2 weeks ago, what were you having, like Speedos dipping into the pool?
You know, I won't talk about all that right now.
So what's going on over in your neck of the woods? How's things?
Nothing much, man. Nothing much. Just living the dream, working, and more working. You know, and excited about the show tonight. That's for sure.
I'm excited about the show tonight too. We've got some real heavy conversation that's going on today. Something that a lot of people probably think about, but maybe there's not enough awareness that's being brought into the situation with all of the things that have been going on across the country with the whole racial tension situation. Definitely brings some light to a different segment of the population, and it doesn't get enough publicity. It doesn't get talked about often, but I think that it directly affects with how people are viewed in the United States. To be frankly with you, if you're not of the Caucasian persuasion, there's certain challenges that are unique to being not white. And so with that being said, we definitely have some different perspectives. We're going to have a familiar face and an unfamiliar voice. Both of these young ladies are going to tell their stories, and it's going to give us a unique perspective. And then after they tell their stories, we'll just dive right into a Q&A. How does that sound, Mr. Montgomery?
Man, it sounds good to me. Let's bring them in.
All right.
We're bringing to the stage, if you will, Miss Jen. This is the third Thursday of the month, so this is her normal time. She's gracious to join us again. So welcome, Jen.
Thank you, James and Eric. So happy to be here.
Awesome. Happy to have you. And we have first-time guest, Miss Tahisha. Tahisha, how are you?
Doing well. Thanks so much for the invite.
No problem. So as Eric said, let's just jump right on in. And Jen, let's hear your story.
Yeah. So it all started more than a decade ago. I went through a divorce. And let me just preface it with this, because I know some of you all watching this probably like, what am I? Because a lot of people ask me, even people that are of my own ethnic background don't even know what I am. So just to, right off the jump, I'm Filipino, Chinese, Spanish, and Portuguese, predominantly Filipino. So that's my background. And so I went through a divorce in about 2009, and after that, and I have to explain this because sometimes people do the math and they're like, wait, it doesn't add up, and then the kid is this old and all this other stuff. And so after I went through that divorce, for any of you that have gone through that, you're in this fog, right? And so I was kind of dating somebody, and I ended up getting pregnant. And so the father is Black. And it was not the most ideal situation. We did care for each other very much, but it was also a time of massive confusion. And of course, hindsight is 50-50. I'm sorry, not 50-50, 2020, 2020. And, I look back and I'm thinking that was like a really bad time for me to, get involved with anybody. But it was also something that I realized was an escape. I was still hurting. I wasn't healed, all these kinds of things. And yet this happened. And so one of the biggest challenges was when I had to tell my parents, or when they found out. And, in the traditional Filipino culture, especially Asian culture in general, there's a lot of honor, there's a lot of respect, all that kind of stuff. And so there's also this thing about putting on, you know, how does it look like to our friends and family and society and all that mess. And so I know that was a big thing that was playing into this whole situation. And so you got to remember, I just got divorced, and then now here I am pregnant and I'm not married. And then on top of it, you know, oh goodness gracious, this person that you're having the baby with is Black. And unfortunately, that's what took place. And so they didn't want me to keep the child. And I didn't listen. And, you know, it was a multitude of things. To this day, we haven't ever really discussed it. It's still a very hurtful situation for me when I think about it, because I don't even really understand what my parents were thinking at that time, you know, so they were going through their own thing. And then I was obviously going through mine. But when that all went down, the thing that I told myself was that I don't care how difficult this is going to be. I am not going to face God one day and say, you know what, I'm sorry, I did not keep the baby. And I'm not knocking anybody that had to go through that choice, because God is for everyone in terms of like forgiveness. So this is not about like, oh, you know, you're a horrible person if you did that, because everybody has their own journey and their own story. But for me personally, I just couldn't do that. So I decided to keep my child. And so that was about 10 years ago. He will be 10 in a few months. His name is CJ Christopher Jordan. And so in the beginning, it was really, really tough, really tough, because, you know, with his father, it was a very volatile and tumultuous situation. And not only that, as the years were going by, there were a lot of things. We never ended up getting married. We never lived together, none of that. So there was this very separate world where, you know, I will raise my child and you can help. I always, you know, made sure I included him. But, you know, it was something that I had to realize too, that this is not a situation where I can't pay attention to certain things. Because my child, our son, is half Black, there are some things I have to pay attention to. You know, as you all have seen in the news, there are all these racial tensions. There are massive amounts of misunderstanding. There is a whole different thing that you go through when the child is Black, or even half. I mean, it's crazy. So I had to, as a parent, as a mother of a half Black child, there are an additional amount of other things that I have to take into consideration. And so, you know, for me, I took it upon myself to really understand Black history, really understand how, you know, and I'm talking about not that stuff they teach you in school, because there's a lot of stuff they do not teach you. And so looking at the history that we're not taught and told, and understanding like how it really went down in American history and things that we're not told. I mean, I had to really learn that stuff so that I can prepare my child. And also for me to have that understanding of, hey, what is the best way for me to prepare my child? Because it is a completely different situation. This is there, and I hate to say it, but there are things that white kids don't ever have to worry about. You never really have, you know, I don't see these situations where as a white kid, you don't have to tell them, hey, you know, make sure you sit on the curb. Hey, make sure you don't have any altercation with the cops. Like those are conversations that I think white families don't really have to, I don't want to say that they don't ever have to think about it, but they kind of don't. But it's a very common conversation that we as parents with Black children have, whatever the percentage is, we have to be aware that eventually has to take place, and how to act and what to do when, if, and it's almost not even an if, it's when it happens. Right. And so there's so many situations that, you know, I even seen his own father go through, being pulled over for no reason, wondering like, how come you haven't showed up at the spot that we said we were going to meet? And I tell you, it has gotten to the point where when that did happen, or he was late and he wasn't answering his phone, I finally just got to the point where I'm like, he got pulled over. He got pulled over, and 45 minutes later, I would get the phone call and like, what, are you okay? I wouldn't even say, how are you? I would just say, are you okay? Wow. Because I just knew he got pulled over. So, you know, those are the kinds of things that I'm mentally preparing for, that I understand that this is going to be conversations about these types of things that will happen. You got to be aware of. And so that's kind of where my story has begun. And so now my child, he's healthy, he's going to be 10, but you know, even now as a mother and looking at this child going to the double digits, like we're now entering the preteen era, and I'm just thinking like, okay, the conversations are going to get way more serious.
Right, definitely. Jen, we're definitely going to have a few questions for you on that. I know I do, and I'm sure Eric will as well.
Absolutely.
Sahisha, let's hear from you.
Okay, well, hello everyone. I guess I represent the other side of this spectrum, right? We've got the Jen who represents the parent, and then myself who is the biracial child. I actually have a white mother and then a Black father. I am probably one of the first generation biracial children in that the movement, after the Lovings, the miscegenation has gone away and now it's supposed to be legal. And, so my mom was rebellious. My dad was dealing with his own colorism issues. And in growing up in the Jim Crow South, as soon as he got out of the South, I think it was kind of that, wow, I'm in California and things are very different here. My mom, on the other hand, was raised to be racist, and held those beliefs up until her mother told her, you better not. And that better not became, now I'm gonna. So her and my dad get together and they tried to make it work. They did. But unfortunately, those dynamics, especially say in the 70s, it's not easy to navigate even when you don't have overtly racist family, right? So my mom has this overtly racist mother, particularly, who beat on my dad to a point of him internalizing it until he was into his 60s, and he had to get that closure from her. My mom, on the other hand, his family is raised Louisiana. My grandmother was also mixed. I believe her father actually was biracial, and she was light skinned and fighting against all of that to get with my grandfather, who was dark skinned. So to accept this white woman into a family when you already have colorism at play, that was something that was hard for her. But when my mother became pregnant, she swallowed that. And that side of the family was always very, very welcoming. I never questioned where I fit when I spent time with them. Now, with my mom's family, which is where I spent the bulk of my time, unfortunately, there was a lot of racism that I had to deal with within the family. And as my dad got his closure without asking for it, I also got mine, because my relationship with my grandmother in particular was always very, very tense. She was the type of racist who loved to let everyone know just how racist she was. So all of that leads me to dealing with identity later in life, and having to find community with other biracial people in order to really kind of understand all of that and how that comes together and where I stand in my own beliefs, in my own identity, as opposed to how everyone sees me. Being raised in a white community, I, of course, not only have light skin privilege, but I also have the privilege of the proximity to whiteness. My mother was definitely one. As soon as I experienced Blackness, my mom she taught me to code switch very early. She was not having none of the, you're not snapping your fingers, you're not wagging your neck, you're not using that slang. When you are around me and my friends, you will speak like you have an education. So it was a long journey, but and it's still going on. And Jen, for you, I hear your question. And I just want you to know it is imperative that you allow your child time in both spaces,
Yeah.
because that's really what is going to shape their acceptance of their identity. In the biracial communities, the biggest thing that we see are grappling with, this side didn't accept me, or this side didn't accept me. So, please just make sure your son has all the access to both spaces.
Mm.
Wow,
That's go
I'm
ahead.
sorry, James. Go ahead, please.
No, I was just gonna say that's powerful, and Tisha, I felt that, and I believe what you're saying. I can relate to you to a certain extent. I too am biracial. My mother was white, my father was black. I'm a '70s baby also, so a lot of what you said I can relate to. And I think it is important. You're absolutely right for a child to know everything that they can about both sides when they come from a biracial family. That's very important. Eric, go ahead and share what you was going to share, and I have a question I want to ask both these ladies.
No problem. Was just wondering when it comes to the support in a Black community, do either one of you ladies have anybody who you can go to for situations that arise? Jen, like with your son, is his dad in his life first of all?
Yeah, his dad's in his life. He's very he's very present. I have full custody, but there's never this situation that I have to worry about that he's not getting enough exposure or that type of thing to the other side. And then fortunately for me, I have a very, very diverse support system. Most of my friends are different ethnic backgrounds. So, which I'm very, very proud of, that my son gets to grow up in an environment where he sees different people, different ethnic backgrounds and things like that. But yeah, some of my best friends, like, especially when we have these tough conversations, should that moment come when I get into a situation that I have to ask somebody, like, how would I handle this? Hands down, I got people to go to.
Okay, excellent. One of the more common questions when I was doing research with anyone that's in a mixed, environment, is when they look at the skin of their mom, they look at the skin of their dad, and they ask, why is my skin color different from your skin color? Have you came across that question yet?
So for me, yeah, when my son was younger, so he'll be 10 this year, but I think it was maybe about 5 years ago, he did ask. And the interesting thing is that we have to formulate our answers in such a way that it can be understood by the level of and age of what that child is at. And so it's kind of like, well, you see what color I am, you see what color daddy is. And it's kind of like when we mix paint. This is why you're this beautiful caramel. I'm actually jealous. He's this golden color. It's beautiful. And I'm like, that's why you are that color. And so, it's really about how do I explain things that he can understand. But it hasn't been an issue. I will say the only times that my heart has been broken is when he goes to school and he'll run into certain situations. Like, for example, a couple years ago, they were celebrating Black History Month, and he did have to learn about slavery. He came home, and one of his best friends at the time is white. And he said, Mommy, Mark is white and I'm Black. And did you know back then, oh, I'm going to cry. He said, did you know back then we couldn't be best friends? He goes, I couldn't even vote. And so it was at that moment that I was like, okay, here we go. Here we go, because you're starting to learn about your people and your history and the background and what people before you had to endure and go through. And it was at that moment that I had to really just realize, like, okay, let's go. Like, I got to equip you and help you understand, like, this is what has happened to people that have come before you in your culture. And so, it's like things like that, or, even another segue would be like, having to explain to him, like, yeah, it's not this traditional thing. Like, where you see mom and dad live together. So on top of not having that traditional nuclear structure, we have racism and understanding your identity on top of everything. So it's really learning how to weave through this and explain these answers in the best way possible for a young child to understand.
All right. Well, thank you.
You're welcome.
Have you? What is the support system like? What was the support system like for you as a biracial individual? I know that you said that you were primarily raised by your mom, but how much time did you spend with your dad?
So they were married up until I was 3, and then they got divorced. And my dad moved back to Louisiana, or actually, I'm sorry, they were living in Louisiana. My mom moved back to California. So my first memory was around 6, and every other summer, my dad would send for me. So I would go visit Louisiana every other summer. And every summer, every time I was there, I wanted to live there. Like that's how much I felt at home. Now, it probably didn't hurt that here I am, again in the deep South. I am one of the only light-skinned children or grandchildren in the family. And so my family, whether that was it or whatever else, my family treated me like I was gold. So you literally go from every day this mental beatdown, microaggressions, someone who has no idea what your experience is like, to every other year for 2.5 months, you get to feel free. You get to feel familial love. You get to feel like you understand who you are and where you're at, if that makes sense.
It does. It sounds like that you went through something that a lot of people don't seem to experience, and that's the reverse discrimination and partly expression. But it was almost like when you were with your mom, you weren't white enough.
I absolutely wasn't white enough, and I lived within a family that didn't have a problem reminding me of that, because again, my mother rebelled to even be with my dad. She has a sister and 2 brothers. Her sister is older than her, and her sister would take her to clubs on the military base. And as you know, you've got a mixture of different guys at these clubs. And my aunt would pretty much set her up. She would take her to these clubs. My mom would have a great time. And then my aunt would go home and be like, yeah, she was dancing with black guys. And then that's when my grandmother would be like, hey, no, that's not okay. You better not. And my mom, being who she is, oh, word? Okay, okay. Let's see what happens.
Okay, James, do you have anything?
I got a lot of stuff. But I'm just going to start here. Tisha, I want to ask you specifically. First off, and let me preface this. Jen knows this. Once again, being a veteran of the show, Eric and I we do not have a filter. The only filter I have is right here in front of my microphone, and it doesn't filter out all the things that goes on up here. So if I ask you anything that you don't want to answer, next question, please, is all I need. So my question to you is, and then this is a question I've answered once again, relate to you. What do you identify as right now?
I currently identify as a Black biracial. I have graduated from owning a Black identity. One of the things that I'm hearing a lot more of lately is a conversation of gatekeeping within the Black community. And I am Black first, right? In my heart, I am Black first. So there's a big part of me that says, fall back and understand why this community is having this conversation. Now, being in the communities that I am in with other biracial people, the Black biracial identity was introduced to me. And Black biracial is centering Blackness, but also saying I am something else. It's not just this. So I am not owning anything at this point, but I am part of this community, though I am something else.
At what point did you start identifying as Black biracial?
Probably 2.5, 3 years ago.
Okay. Growing up, what did you consider yourself or identify as?
Gosh, you know, I was okay with Oreo for a while. I was okay with zebra for a while. It wasn't until I was in high school where I was 30, one of 30 Black children in a school of 600 to 800 students, that I really kind of started to connect to my Blackness. And then that's when I stood firm in my Black identity. And I also let my mom know I am Black. Like, yes, I understand you are white. I understand that's part of my lineage, but I am Black.
And temporarily, and I'll turn it back over to Eric. What was it like growing up for you? Eric kind of asked me about me, and I'm just curious for you. What was it like growing up? In your case, growing up around, it sounds like more white kids until you got to high school. Is that where you got more exposure to Black kids in high school?
I actually got, so I, in the post that I wrote to you, I was saying how my first best friend, my first Black best friend, is what helped me connect to Blackness. I met her in junior high, and that's where, like, I started with the speaking, AAVE and more stereotypically Black, right? And I say that with no offense at all. But it was more stereotypical. So she was my first exposure. She she and I would not really be as close for a few years until about high school, when she moved in with us. And then that's when I really kind of, she really transmitted what it was like to be a Black woman. Now she is a dark skinned Black woman, so I don't know what her experience was like, but she was at least transmitting that to me when I didn't have that before. So going through high school, I read the autobiography of Malcolm X. I was vice president of the Black Student Unity. And yeah, that's really where I started building a community of other Black people so that I could better connect.
Okay. Tisha, we've got a question here for you from Ben. Ben is real quick. Shout out to Ben. Thanks for listening in, Ben. Ben is the owner of BS3 Radio, one of the networks that Eric and I are very proud to be a part of. So once again, thanks, Ben, for listening. But Tisha, he wants to know, how did your mom feel when you said you were Black?
When I initially said it, it wasn't a threat to her. I think she kind of understood, but at the same time, I was still operating under a lot of biases that I had already been taught. And to be perfectly honest, there was a great deal of anti-Blackness that I believed in and spewed. So while I'm over here saying I'm Black, I'm also saying, oh my gosh, look at the Black community. It's so ghetto. They're killing each other. Like, I legitimately bought into those types of things, right? So she still felt pretty safe the first time I said it. When I got much older and let her know, like, no, this is my identity, it was more threatening. And while she is doing her best to deal with it these days, it is still a point of sensitivity for her.
You had said something, Tahisha, and I want to make sure I understood you correctly. Did you say your best friend moved in with you all?
She did, yes.
So what was that like, and how did that come to happen?
She unfortunately didn't have a great family structure in her immediate family. She lived with her grandmother for a while, and we were neighbors for a while she was living with her grandmother. Things were getting more and more tense because the grandmother's house was almost a dumping ground for the kids in the family. So she had reached out to me. She also had a daughter by then. And I convinced my mom to let her come and live with us. And my mom took her in as a foster child.
How, how long did she stay with you guys?
Maybe about a year.
Wow.
Oh,
You know what? That's pretty powerful.
yeah. One last question before you jump in, Eric. It's a really quick one. I want to ask Jen and Tahisha, and I'll be quiet for a second. Jen, the one drop rule. What are your thoughts on that as a parent? And Tahisha, I would love to hear yours as well, but let's hear from Jen first.
So explain to me what that rule is.
Okay. Before I do, let's jump over to Tahisha, and you might grab this, Jen, and if not, we'll explain.
Awesome.
Okay. So the one drop rule is the rule that says if you have more than, what was it? I think 1/4, maybe even less, of black blood or non-white blood, really, you are black. So for, let's say, a good example might be Halsey. If you know who Halsey is, Halsey has a biracial parent, and she is very white assumed, but she will at times take on a black identity. And for some people, that is considered her being kind of like a one dropper, because she doesn't have the proximity to blackness that she is trying to present. I have a problem with that rule. Let me just say that.
Okay. So, and Jen, I want to read this verbatim from Wikipedia. This is their explanation. The one drop rule is a social and legal principle of racial classification that was historically prominent in the United States in the 20th century. It asserted that any person with even one ancestor of black ancestry, one drop of black blood, is considered black. So what are your thoughts on that?
You know, I think there's a lot of rules that have been written in history and things that have, even like the fractions and everything. And a lot of them are just completely asinine and stupid. And so when it comes to what I feel or think about it, I'm very careful that when I am interacting with my son, that he understands that, and, you know, especially with the questions that he has had for me, I at the end of the day, no matter what kind of rules or what kind of structures have been put in place around us in our environment, I always tell myself the most important thing that I can do for him is that he understands he is loved from both sides, his father as well as me. And so I really focus on that. So we haven't had that discussion yet with some of these rules and these fractions and things like that are, we probably are going to most likely have to encounter. But like I said earlier, you know, I have to take everything within context of what I can say and how I can explain things depending on his, you know, the age at which he had questions on. And so, you know, at the end of the day, it just really comes down to that, you know, you understand what daddy is, you understand what I am, but you are so loved. You are so loved. And I really focus on, like, you know, mindset. I really focus on him understanding that there is injustice. There are these things, especially last year when a bunch of stuff was happening in 2020. You know, having to explain to him, like, you know, these things that he might have seen on the news, these things that he might have encountered at school, these things that he might have heard in passing because grandma was watching the news or something like that. You know, just having to set him aside and having to tell him, like, this is what's going on. This is what, you know, this person encountered. And I remember having to tell them, a lot of it, because you're black. And yeah, it's tough. It's really tough because, you know, I didn't encounter that myself. And so me being obviously non-black, it's this thing that just hits you where you have to realize, like, oh my gosh, like, I didn't have to grow up this way. I didn't have to think about these things that I, you know, I'm never going to have to worry about encountering that. And yet here I am having to raise, especially a little black boy. I mean, he's got the afro and everything. He's darker than me. He's not light skinned. His father is dark. So my son is much darker than me. And, you know, there's no mistaking that there's no mistake that he's you know, at least half black. He looks like a version of me, but darker with an afro. And, you know, so, you know, for me, it was just really important to just instill, you know, who he is, that he's loved. And, but yeah, I mean, encountering, it's almost like this journey of like having to explain one more little thing. Okay, one more little thing, because I have to be very cognizant that I don't dump everything, and then also paying attention to what's happening around with the current events, things that might happen in the news, things that might be discussed, you know, like George Floyd or Trayvon Martin or whatever happens. I'm like, I have to stop and pause and explain, like, okay, this is what happened. Do you understand? And then more importantly for me, it's like, how do you feel about this? You know, just trying to engage in some kind of dialogue that he's understanding, or that he's processing it, or just at least understanding, like, how do you feel when you hear these things, so that I'm not just, there's definitely no way that I'm going to go through all this and just sweep it under the rug, because that's the problem. And anything that I do, you have to have open lines of communication and dialogue to talk about these things. Otherwise, you know, that's where more and more problems start to happen. But it's so important for me to understand where he's coming from. And even as a little child, like, how are you processing all these things that are happening around us?
You know, that actually leads into a question that I was going to ask about CJ. How is he handling all of this? Up until last year, it really wasn't the, you know, the onslaught of emotion, you know, with everybody rallying for social justice. As a soon-to-be 10-year-old, what sort of changes have you noticed in his behavior from, you know, the pre-riots to post-riots?
Yeah, for the most part, I feel that he's handling it pretty well. He does see it, he does understand it, but there was this conversation last year when the whole George Floyd thing happened, and you know, I remember sitting him down and trying to explain things and how the interaction, obviously we all seen it and we all know what's, you know, happening with cops in the Black community and things that we see. And I had to sit him down and, like, you know, talk to me about this. And he simply said, it makes me sad because of his color. Oh my gosh. Yeah. It was just that simple, that it made him sad, because there's nothing I can do about it. You know, it's not like, it's sad. It's not like you can just take this jacket off. It's not like you can just take this hoodie off. It's like, you know, I was talking to somebody I'm extremely close to who had his ex-wife, he's Black, his ex-wife is white. She came from a very racist family, and they would say things like, you know, oh, you can't wash that off. And I mean, stuff like that. You know, I think about, is my son going to encounter that? Is my son going to hear those types of things? And so just hearing from, you know, as a, you know, 9-year-old, having for him to tell me, it makes me sad. And he said it so somberly, like, I was just like, man, I can't take that away. And that's when it really hit me even more. Not that I wasn't aware of it, but it really hit me even harder, that I'm like, this is the reality that we live in. This is what I'm up against. This is how I can only protect so much. But the best thing I can do is to make him aware, so that if and when he does encounter certain things, he's not caught off guard.
Okay. And then one other question. You mentioned with your parents, when they found out, you know, that you were pregnant with them, and the conversation really wasn't had. But what is their treatment of CJ? How do they interact with him?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Thank God. They love him. They absolutely love and adore him. So I have been very blessed in that situation, in those circumstances. You know, after he was born, they just completely embraced him, loved on him. I mean, they have been, especially because his dad is not, like, you know, obviously we did not end up married. We never moved in together. It was just kind of like, okay, like, I have pretty much a full custody of him. And so it just really worked out where they happened to be both retired, and they just loved on him. So I was very fortunate that I did have that experience where they didn't reject him, and he hasn't experienced anything like negative. So I was very, very fortunate that it turned out that way.
Okay, well, that's good. And I've seen pictures of him, and I've seen a lot of the activities that you guys have done. So he's a very handsome guy, very energetic, and seems to be a very intelligent young man. So you're doing an excellent job.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
You are very welcome. And I guess from the other spectrum, Tanisha, as a child, the treatment that you received from Louisiana and the treatment that you received from California, it was entirely different, obviously. So you gave us perspective on what happened when you were over in Louisiana. What were some of the more difficult situations that you faced over in California?
Well, um, uh, being the scapegoat at least once, where all of my cousins decided that even though I had not done something, that someone had drawn in crayon on the house. And my cousins all decided Tahisha did it. And Tahisha's going to go to the parents and say that she did it. And they really just kept on me until I decided, okay, I'm going to take the blame for something I did not do. Um, there were there were definitely other times that, like, whenever we would visit my grandmother in particular, um, she was just always harder on me. Every little thing, she made sure to comment about every anything I did just was not right. And it got to a point of where my mom would start to feel sensitive about it, and then she would try to become the shield. So there was a situation where I didn't load the dishwasher right. I didn't put the knives sharp side down. I left them up. And my grandmother was, yelling at me for this. And my mom, swooped in and was like, well, hey, I can't say that I really taught her how to load dishes into the dishwasher. So it was all of these smaller things that just kind of built on top of each other. I can't tell you how many times I've heard the speech that there is white people and there's white trash. There's black people and then there's the N word. And of course, she would make sure to say that N word every single time. And the last time I allowed her to get away with that was one Thanksgiving in, I want to say 2007. This is my grandmother. She was giving me and my family the speech. And by now, I've got my husband, I've got my children in the room, and she just felt so free to drop that N bomb. And at the stage in my life that I was at, I was not okay with that. And I let her know, like, you cannot do that. And that caused a decent rift. My mom took my side because by now she's kind of used to doing that with her. But yeah, that was a terrible way to spend a holiday.
And about how old were you at that point, Tahisha?
I was in my 30s by then because again, I wasn't having her shit. She had talked shit to me long enough in my life that now I'm more secure in my identity. I'm a grown ass woman, and you're not going to approach me like that. So as soon as she dropped that N bomb, I let her know, no, you're not going to do that.
And just to get a picture here, you're mentioning your husband. Race of your husband?
He's black.
So your grandma
Jamaican descent.
So your grandma felt comfortable enough to drop that N bomb in front of your black husband and your black children,
Yes.
And she felt wow.
Yes, and this is what I'm saying. Like my dad, unfortunately, because of the divorce, my dad and I are having a much closer relationship now than we had, any other point in my life. So he's now really kind of opening up to me and sharing with me some of his experiences. And like I said, a few years ago, he had to confront her. He had to get his closure. And now he's letting me know, like, they would go visit my grandparents to have a cool night. Like everybody's drinking, chilling, and she's drunk and talking shit and calling him out his name. And, my grandfather, even though he's sending her to her room, she's calling my mom back there and talking loud enough for the entire house to hear her. So this was a woman who took pride in people knowing how she felt. Now, as I got older, I am not trying to brag, but I am the more successful of all of my cousins. And I think this finally made her see me as a goddamn human. Because the last couple of years of her life, she spent that time telling me, oh, I love you so much. And you're so much like me. And I'm so sorry. And, yeah. And I'm at a point in my life where, okay, I forgive you. You got to move forward. I can't hold on to that. That's her cross to bear, not mine.
I have a question. Did you bear any resentment towards the white community based on how your grandmother was treating you?
I do, and it's not all white people. I now am looking at races as opposed to white people who are truly allies, white people who truly are not with the shit, and there really is a distinction there. Whereas before I couldn't see that. So, I hold them accountable in a way that I feel like I can, because they don't want to hear it from other communities. I read an article that was saying that somehow, this is stupid as hell, but somehow biracial people can reach over to the white aisle easier than non-biracial people. Okay, logically I get that, but that's fucking dumb. And then a step up from that is hearing it from actual other white people. So no, when I encounter them and they're racist and they're in their privilege, I'm sorry. I'm letting you know. I'm going to check you.
Yeah, that's a conversation probably that we could have. Not only white privilege, but as you alluded to earlier, light privilege.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Oh, I can't even tell you. The main group that I'm in, we stay on their necks. And it may even be an effort in futility because we all arrive at different understandings at different times in our lives. But I just see the damage that can be done, and in the lane swerving that happens. And we've got what was that little girl, Danny Lay, that did that yellow bone is what he wants. Not only is she taking the L for her community, but now you're pulling light skins into it. Light skinned people who have nothing to do with that. But that raises a whole conversation about light skin privilege.
And may I ask you, you alluded to that your husband is of Jamaican descent. So can I assume that he is of a darker complexion?
He's actually not.
He's not? Okay.
He's not. Nope.
Okay. And so in reference to your kids, what complexion are they? I'm guessing that you and your husband are probably similar in complexion?
Yes, we are. And okay. They are very ambiguous in appearance.
Okay. And I'm just needing to just kind of like backtrack towards that holiday scene. How did they respond to your grandmother's rant?
Well, one of them was still a baby. So it was just the fear of like, oh, drama amongst the adults. The other one was in her double digits, and that's something that she will always remember.
Okay. Well, you know what? Hey, you know what? Obviously, you're going to stand up for what's yours, but you know what? Thank you for convincing at least one person to have a broader perspective on the fact that we all are human, that this uniform that we've been given, we don't have the option of changing our uniform. This is what we came in with. We had no influence over what our parents did. So you know what, as a black man, in terms of raising other black men and being black, that it's definitely difficult doing that. And you being raised, and then Jen, you having to raise, a biracial baby, you know what, it's tough. And it's no tougher than in 2021. Not even going to get political, but the last president that we had was pretty much a racist, in my opinion. At first, I used to think that, he's just ignorant. Now he treats everybody like that. But over the last couple of months, You know what? There's no doubt. There is no doubt in my mind that monkey see, monkey do. And a lot of people are way more comfortable now saying, hey, I'm a racist. Hey, you know what? Black folks this and other ethnicities that. When it all boils down to it, getting back to that 1%, that one drop rule, James, we all originate from Africa. So if that's the case, there really isn't a non-Black person that's in this country, if you really think about it from that perspective.
What's a little disturbing, in my opinion, is we all have raised children or are still raising children on this panel today. And if raising children doesn't have its own challenges, but then to add in to talk about, as Jen talked about earlier, I remember having a conversation with my son. While you're driving, don't have your hood on from your hoodie. You're walking down the street, don't have your hood on. Don't have earbuds in because, you're going to be stereotyped. Don't have your music too loud, no matter what you're listening to. It's bad that we have to go that extra step and have to worry about those things along with just the normal things of raising a child. As if that wasn't, I'm not going to say hard enough. We all know it has its challenges. It's natural. We've got a whole human that has a whole personality, that think they know everything, at a young age, just like we all did at some point. And then you have to add in that aspect. It's really challenging. It's really, it really sucks that has to be something we have to take into consideration.
Absolutely. I'm pretty much done with any questions that I have. Just like a quick comment, though, like I said again, what the amount of challenges that the both of you have been through, definitely, commend you for being advocates for the African American community. Raising, a young Black man, making sure that he knows the other half of his heritage, and making sure we educate, all of our children on the unique challenges. And also there's that fine line where we also don't want to turn our children into racists, because with all of the things that are happening, we want to make sure that we acknowledge what's going on, but we don't want to condemn, the other ethnicities, because without the other ethnicities, we wouldn't have gotten this far. So it's a tightrope act. So we have to make sure that they embrace who they are. We have to make sure that when they look in the mirror, that they see more than just skin color. You can do anything that anybody else can do. You can accomplish anything that anybody else can do. Now we've had, an African-American president. We've got an African-American female vice president. There are senators, congressmen, governors, the whole gamut. So Black history is every day. And we're constantly not only just making Black history, but we're making American history. We're making world history. So as long as we have, people like you two, then we are headed in the right direction.
Most definitely. Well, I personally want to thank both of you for being on the show. Jen, we're going to see you again 4 weeks from today on March the 18th. So we're definitely looking forward to returning to the Talking Money with Jen. But I think this was a great conversation to have. Tahisha, great having you. I personally, on behalf of Eric, would like to say that we'd love to have you on the show again. We're definitely going to be talking some other things around race, and we always do. It always is a topic, and it's going to be an ongoing discussion, unfortunately. But we definitely love to have you back on the show talking some of anything. So thank you both once again for being on the show tonight.
No, thanks so much, and I would definitely love to come back.
Awesome. All right. So everyone, thanks for tuning in. You heard it from our mouths to your ears. Thanks for tuning in tonight.
Stay safe, America.